Michael Shermer. He's one of the most famous skeptics in the world, no doubt about it. But is he also one of its most flawed thinkers? Today we're diving right into the middle of the firestorm surrounding him, a guy who seems to live right at the center of our biggest debates.
So what's the deal? Is he a true champion of reason, or is he a thinker whose own logic has some serious cracks? In this explainer, we're going to look at both sides. We'll explore some of the sharpest criticisms leveled against him, and also dig into his core arguments in that never-ending clash between science and religion.
So, first things first, who is Michael Shermer? Well, he's the founder of Skeptic magazine and a best-selling author. He's built this huge platform for himself, which makes him one of the most influential voices out there for skepticism and secularism today. You really can't miss him.
Okay, to really understand the whole picture with Shermer, we've got to start with the criticisms. And let me tell you, they come from all angles and they go way beyond just his philosophical ideas.
You can really group the criticisms against him into four big buckets. We're going to touch on each one to get the full context. His philosophy, his public conduct, some pretty serious personal allegations, and even the very way he goes about being a skeptic.
So, one of the big philosophical knocks against him is something called a category error. Now, what does that mean? Well, critics argue that Shermer sometimes uses the wrong tools for the job. It's like trying to measure spiritual meaning with a scientific ruler. The tool just doesn't fit the task.
And it's not just philosophy. His public commentary has really sparked a lot of controversy. Some people have accused him of intellectual dishonesty, especially when it came to his comments on the January 6th Capitol attack. His critics felt he was seriously downplaying how big of a deal it was.
And we really can't talk about this without mentioning the serious personal allegations that have followed his career. There have been credible accusations of sexual misconduct, and those have deeply, deeply damaged his reputation, especially within the skeptic community that he helped create.
All right, now let's pivot to the arena where Michael Shermer is probably most famous, his public debates about religion. This is where you can really see the core of his entire intellectual project come to life. In his many, many fiery debates, Shermer makes a consistent case for a totally secular worldview. We can actually break down his arguments against traditional religious belief into a few key points that he comes back to again and again.
This pretty much sums up his whole platform. First, he argues that morality is a human invention, right? It's something that grew out of reason and culture, not handed down from some divine source. Second, he's all about reason over faith, arguing that faith is just not a reliable way to find out what's true. And third, he basically frames science and religion as being totally at odds, using methods that just can't work together.
But of course, these arguments have not gone unanswered, not by a long shot. Christian thinkers and apologists have developed direct counter-arguments for every single one of Shermer's points, which has created this really robust, ongoing public debate.
When it comes to morality, the debate just hits a fundamental nerve. Shermer says, hey, we build our own morals. His opponents fire back, well, without a divine foundation, isn't morality just your opinion? They argue that our most deeply held values, things like universal human rights, are actually rooted in a Christian worldview.
Next up, they clash big time on the role of reason. Shermer sees faith as basically irrational, but Christian thinkers push back hard on that. They say, no, faith and reason actually work together. And besides, they argue, reason by itself is totally powerless to answer life's biggest questions, like, what's our purpose?
And this brings us to a huge historical debate over science itself. Shermer sees this massive conflict between science and religion, but his critics are quick to point out that modern science was basically pioneered by devout Christians. Think Newton, Kepler. These guys saw their scientific work as exploring God's orderly creation, not fighting against it.
And finally, it all kind of hinges on the supernatural. Shermer demands extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claims, like miracles. Makes sense, right? But his opponents argue that that demand isn't as neutral as it sounds. They say it starts with a philosophical bias against the possibility of miracles, which means you're dismissing historical testimony before you even really look at it.
So, after all that back and forth, what does it all mean? Why does this matter? Well, this isn't just some academic squabble. It actually reveals something really fundamental about our culture right now.
Why should we even care that these arguments about faith and reason and morality are still raging on so fiercely? What does this ongoing, seemingly unresolvable battle actually teach us about ourselves?
When you step back, the whole controversy around Michael Shermer, everything from his philosophy to his personal conduct,
It's like a perfect snapshot of one of the most enduring questions we face. How do we actually know what's true? It shows that even now we are still fiercely, passionately debating the very best way to find an answer.